All right. So thank you everyone for coming. Looks like we've got, sorry, I can't see everybody now that I've got my screen share on.
We've got 10 people.
Got 10 folks, 11 now. And we really appreciate your time. Some of the folks on the call are on the steering committee and we'll introduce them in a moment. Oh, there's Nick. Terrific. All right, so we will, as you saw, be recording today. So if folks miss this and want to watch it later, they can. And I believe that Josh, the town manager, was going to introduce the team and welcome everybody, but it looks like maybe he isn't able to join us. So Katie, do you want to do that or do you want me to just take over?
Sure, I'm happy to do that.
I just thought maybe you could just welcome everybody, talk about what we're going to talk about today, and then introduce the steering committee.
Yep. So we're going to go over the goals of the committee and some of the ideas that we've been working on to share with folks and to get people's feedback. We have with us from the committee today, we have Candy Perez, we have Chris Hunter, we have Pam Columbi, we have Nick Teeling, myself, Ted Schaefer, and Jocelyn. And there's a few of us, a few committee members who weren't able to make it today. Or maybe they're going to be joining us in a few minutes.
Thanks, Katie. Yeah, so what we are gonna cover, and this is not tonight because we were going to try to have an in-person forum as well, and we will still do that, but we weren't able to have an in-person forum tonight. We're doing this today, and then we will have an in-person forum at some point. But basically what we want to catch everybody up on is what housing needs this plan is trying to address. We're going to review with you some of the goals and strategies for meeting the town's housing needs that the steering committee has been talking about. But more importantly, we want to get the feedback of the folks who showed up today and any other ideas or comments or questions that attendees have for the steering committee. That's really the goal of today's forum. And as Katie mentioned, this is the steering committee members, many of which are on the call today to hear any questions or comments that you have. The steering committee meets monthly on the second Wednesdays of the month. Those meetings are all open to the public and noticed. And again, basically the steering committee is working towards creating this housing affordability plan for the town. I'll talk a little bit about kind of what has happened in the process of creating this housing plan to date and what the next steps are, and give you just a little bit of background information. We did have a town informational forum about the housing plan a couple months ago. I'm not sure how many of you were able to go to that, but just to make sure that we're all on the same page, we're just going to review a couple things about kind of why the town is creating a housing plan and what we mean when we talk about affordability. So first of all, every town in the state of Connecticut technically has to have a housing plan by tomorrow. We are not going to make the tomorrow deadline, but we are, the town is actively working on creating a housing plan, so they'll be fine. But this legislation was passed in July 2017, requiring every town in the state to have a housing plan. It does have to specifically address how the town will create housing options that are affordable by the state's definition, and we'll talk about what that definition is. But it can also more broadly cover housing needs in general in the community. And when this is done, it will be a guidance document similar to your town plan of conservation and development. So it will not have regulatory authority. But again, it's really meant to be a process that the town goes through to think about what its housing needs are and how those could be met over the coming 5 years. So that's what we're in the process of doing. And when we talk about affordability, again, partly due to the fact that this is a statewide requirement, we're using the state's definition of affordability. If housing costs are less than 30% of the income of a household at 80% of the area median income or less, then it is considered affordable. So the chart here shows you, obviously, the area median income changes every year. So this is the 2021 numbers. But for example, if you were a single person household making $55,000 or less, you would qualify to live in affordable housing by the state's definition. If you were a 4-person household making $79,000 or less, you would also qualify. So Winchester, the town of Winchester, has 1,955 households that earn below this income. And again, the reason they sort of target this 30% is that, and I think we talked about this a little bit at the last forum, but if a household is paying more than 30% of their income on housing costs, there's just not enough of their household income left over to pay for everything else that they have to pay for. So that's what this kind of pie chart is. And in terms of what you have now, again, we briefly reviewed this at the last forum, but there are many units that are dedicated, again, to remaining affordable over time to households at 80% of the area median income or less. This is how they break down. You've got 216 units that are managed by either the Winchester Housing Authority or the Winchester Housing Development Corp. Those are dedicated to remaining affordable for the long term. And for those are all seniors. And you've got 130 households on waiting lists waiting to get into those units. You do have 170 households that are getting rental assistance currently, and you have 84 households that have basically subsidized mortgages. So they were income eligible households that needed assistance to get a mortgage, and you have 84 households with that. So as I mentioned, if you're paying more than 30% of your income on housing costs, it makes it very challenging to pay for everything else your household needs. You have 640 households that are paying more than 50% of their income on housing costs. So that is extremely challenging. That's considered severely cost burdened. Many folks kind of might be wondering why housing has become so unaffordable over time. And in general, housing costs have risen faster over the last 30 years than incomes have. So that's one of the core reasons, but there's also obviously, and you probably heard this in the national news and the local news and the regional news, but there's really a lack of supply. And so we aren't able to meet the demand for especially new housing. We have a lot of older housing stock in Litchfield County and in Winchester. Specifically, the aging housing stock is, it's more expensive to maintain, to heat and to cool. And so, it it would be good to have a supply of newer homes available, but there are some challenges to that, including some zoning challenges, the cost and availability of buildable land, and I'm sure you've heard about construction costs at this point. So those are just some of the kind of general reasons why housing has become so unaffordable. Again, really not just in Winchester, but in the state and the nation as a whole. In terms of what will be included in the housing plan, and I think we reviewed this a little bit at the informational forum, but you know, there will be, again, this kind of introductory information, like the information I just went over. What do we mean by affordability? An assessment of the current housing needs and Winchester's current housing stock. Again, we went into a fair amount of detail about that at the last community forum, including the survey results from our resident housing needs survey. We also did a survey of community college students and their housing needs, and a worker survey. Other results will be there, as well as an analysis of the housing and demographic trends in the town, and analysis of your current zoning. What we're going to focus on today, because we kind of focused on that at the last forum, are really, again, the goals and strategies, which is, you know, how specifically can the town address the needs that have been identified when we did the needs assessment part. So we do expect to have a full draft of the plan with all of these pieces in one place, hopefully in July. And that will obviously be available for review and comment before it is officially adopted. So again, the Housing Plan Steering Committee has been meeting monthly and talking about proposed goals. And these are the 6 that we're going to talk about today. And we're going to tell you a little bit about what some of the strategies are we think could be employed to meet these goals. So the 6 kind of overarching goals currently are supporting the redevelopment of existing buildings. So taking advantage of kind of what you have now in terms of potentially, you know, vacant buildings, mill buildings, especially in the downtown area, and trying to figure out how to bring those back to life, create some more housing opportunities there. The second one is potentially utilizing appropriate town-owned properties to help meet some of these housing needs, supporting first-time home buyer options, preserving what you have now in terms of your stock of affordable housing options, keeping seniors living affordably in their homes. Obviously, that's key. And then protecting against displacement and poor housing conditions. So those are the 6 kind of main goals that the steering committee has been talking about to date. So what we're going to kind of launch into is I'm going to go through each of these 6 and again, talk about some of the strategies that the committee has discussed for feedback today. And then we're going to use polling, the Zoom polling feature, to just see what the folks who are in attendance today, whether they support these goals or not. You know, we don't have a ton of folks here today, but we do appreciate the ones that have come. So if you do have questions about this as we go along, or again, other ideas, I'll sort of maybe pause at the end of each slide and get any thoughts or ideas that any of you who are not on the steering committee, any kind of comments or thoughts you have on these. So again, this first goal is around redeveloping the existing buildings to create some of the housing options that we've seen the need for. Continuing to work with, for example, owners of mill buildings and other properties. When we had the first community forum about this housing plan, there did seem to be quite a lot of interest in trying to utilize those mill buildings as much as possible. Another strategy, obviously, is continuing to support the remediation of sites that were once, sorry, there's a big truck going by my house. That were once industrial or manufacturing buildings. I know that the town has been doing that quite a bit over time and is very much aware of the funding opportunities available through the Connecticut Office of Brownfield Remediation and Development, and is, you know, continuing to try to support property owners to, again, get those buildings reused. Another specific idea that has come up is trying to redevelop the vacant space at the old Winstead Hospital by working with the Winstead Health Center Foundation, who owns that building. So those are the strategies we've talked about kind of under this goal. And we are going to ask you what you think of that just by using Zoom polling. And then again, we can now or at any time kind of open it up to any other comments or questions or feedback, but I'm going to
Jocelyn,
yeah.
this is Candy.
Hi, Candy.
There's 3 people that haven't been, that are in the meeting that aren't on the committee that I know of.
Yep.
Could they introduce themselves, and are they just residents, or are they part of another organization? So there's Carol, Tiffany, and Jay. I know who Jay is, but Carol and Tiffany.
I'm a resident.
Great.
Hi, my name is Tiffany. My husband and I purchased a home here in Winstead about 1.5 years ago.
Oh, good. Nice to meet you all.
Nice to meet you.
So
Is everybody voting or no committee voting? Because it's like we're taking multiple bites.
yeah, I mean, as you mentioned, we only have a few folks. So I think the committee can vote. I think that's fine. I mean, we're not gonna, this is just, again, to help facilitate the conversation and get some level of feedback. So I will share the results with everybody as we go along here. Okay, so this one looks like everybody who voted.
I'm not voting.
Okay.
Because they don't
Does
Sorry.
There is
Yeah.
another new person who just joined, I think. It doesn't have a name. AXUJUO. If you could maybe introduce yourself.
All right, well, we'll just keep going, I think, if that's okay. If anybody has any questions, ideas, feedback on any of these, just feel free to raise your hand, or you can type in the chat box as well. But I'm just going to keep going, and again, in the interest of time. So the next goal is potentially to utilize appropriate, not all town-owned properties will be appropriate for use for housing, but to use town-owned properties potentially to create these needed housing options. So the strategies we're talking about is reviewing a list of town-owned properties to determine which ones might be appropriate to use or reuse to create these needed housing options, and then develop a request for proposals for the ones that are determined appropriate, to identify potential developers who have the experience to build, sell or own and manage high quality housing options. And then potentially consider leasing, selling, or donating properties to nonprofit organizations, again, who can create the types of housing that are needed in the town. So we have another quick polling question here, which hopefully you see now, just whether you support this goal of utilizing town-owned properties in this way. All right. So these are our results. All right. Any questions about that one? Right, I'm going to move on to supporting first-time home buyer options. One of the things sometimes we do with these housing plans, I'm not sure I mentioned, but I'm working with 8 other towns currently on their municipal housing plans, and I worked with 6 last year, is just also trying to increase awareness about some of the programs that do exist to help folks. For example, the Connecticut Housing Finance Authority, also referred to as CHAFA, and USDA do help first-time home buyers. Again, income eligible households can qualify for a mortgage through those entities, and also down payment assistance. So just increasing awareness around those programs is one thing we think we could try to do in terms of that. There's also a Habitat for Humanity chapter that does work in the region. I don't think they've built anything yet in Winchester, but to partner with Habitat for Humanity, potentially to create some of these first-time home buyer options. And the Habitat for Humanity model is one in which typically volunteers help build the home, including the family who is going to live there. So it's kind of a type of home where the volunteers help build the housing. And the other thing we have talked about as a possibility is considering how properties that might become property of the town because of unpaid taxes could potentially be utilized to create these kinds of first-time home buyer options. So our polling questions around this, we have 3 of them. They're the general, do you support this goal? Were you aware of these programs to assist first-time home buyer options, the CHAFA and USDA programs? Just curious about the folks who attended and whether you knew about those. And then would you be interested in learning more about those CHAFA and USDA programs? All right, I'm gonna stop the polling. Should be able to, you can see the results, right, Katie?
Yes. Yes, I can.
Sorry, I'm trying to just jot them down really fast. Okay. And again, feel free to, raise your hand or call out if you have other questions or ideas around that goal. This goal is again around preserving those 216 units of affordable senior housing you have in town currently, planning for long-term sustainability of those. Those are currently, as I mentioned, owned and managed by the Winchester Housing Authority and the Winchester Housing Development Corp. So the strategies that the committee has talked about are, like any nonprofit board, it needs they need volunteers. And so just trying to make sure that the Housing Authority has, and the Housing Development Corp have the volunteer board members that they need. And then considering whether some kind of formalized partnership between those two entities might make sense in order to support the viability and sustainability of those 216 existing units, and maybe even potentially be able to address creating additional units in the future. Does anybody have any questions around this one? We'll launch our one polling question here, which is again, just if you support this goal. All right, here's our results on this one. All right, we have two more goals to go over, I believe. This one is about keeping seniors living affordably in their homes. Again, increasing awareness about some of the programs to help with electricity and heating costs. Again, as we talked about the town's housing stock, there are a fair number of older homes that are more challenging to heat and cool. I know I have such an old house. It's lovely to have an old house, but it's not so fun to pay for the electricity or the heating costs in the winter. So, and those programs obviously aren't only for seniors. They can be, more generally utilized by any homeowner, but just kind of, again, increasing awareness about what some of those are. And then ensure the zoning regulations allow residents to add wheelchair ramps or other things as they may be needed over time. Increase awareness about the Connecticut Home Care Program for elders, which helps income eligible seniors continue to live at home instead of having to go to a nursing home by providing some services. And then again, just increasing awareness about the existing services for seniors, including dial-a-ride services, being able to get to medical appointments if you can't drive, senior lunches, et cetera. So we have a polling question about that. Just our general question about whether you support that goal. All right. And then this is the last kind of the goals that we have been talking about as a committee, which is protecting against displacement of existing residents and poor housing conditions. So one of the ideas, and I believe this is happening, is that right, Katie, that there is going to be a study conducted around potentially creating a fair rent committee or
Yes.
commission?
Yes, that's correct.
Actually, there was, some of you might know, legislation passed in this last legislative session requiring cities over a certain population to have a fair rent commission. So for example, the city of Torrington, according to the state legislation, has to create one of these. But what they can be is a way to address the rents being raised for above more than what is reasonable. And it's really a forum for both landlords and tenants to be able to kind of have a forum for addressing those concerns, reviewing rent increases and assessing the condition of the unit. I think, Katie has seen in her work some fairly significant rent increases that she has told us about over the last, 6 months?
6
a
months
year,
for sure. Yeah, definitely.
that
So in
aren't-
some cases doubled, rents have doubled from 600 to 1,200.
Right.
Add something, Jocelyn, while you're talking
Yeah.
about this fair rent thing, is the
Yeah.
legislature created it and the commission exists, but there's no current funding in our budget for any of this. And there are costs to this fair rent commission.
Okay.
See them out front, but as soon as you get into legal fees and you start calling people in and they start with legal challenges, there will be costs to that. So when the committee meets, the idea of the committee meeting is to look at what we have internally already that can maybe address some of these issues, and then to wait, and for me anyway, to look at next year in terms of what actual costs may be if we were to have this commission as well. Just want to let everybody know that's why we as a board went to have a look at things. And I noticed Jay was on the call, so Jay might be able to speak to the legislature's intent and if they were planning to put any funding towards this.
Well, I can't speak for Jay. He can jump in if he wants to. Yeah, this is definitely something that a lot of communities are going to be looking into over the coming weeks and months. There are a bunch of webinars about it. So I think there will be a lot of communities learning about what this will really mean and how it could potentially address housing challenges in the community. As Candy was saying, there are some things that the town is already doing in terms of inspecting, for example, buildings that are currently rented. 3 or more unit buildings are inspected every 2 years. And that, the building department can come and inspect a 3 or more unit building to assess kind of the conditions and make sure that they comply with the rules. And And there's also obviously blight remediation efforts happening in the community, and the people can submit a blight complaint form when and if that occurs in their neighborhood. The city can also does have a housing rehabilitation loan program through the Small Cities CDBG program. If there was enough demand for that, it could apply in the future potentially for additional funding for that type of program that does help income eligible homeowners make needed repairs to their homes. So those are the strategies that we've talked about so far. And again, I'm just gonna launch some polling questions around that. So your questions are, again, generally, do you support this goal? Were you aware about the requirement for a housing inspection in 3+ unit buildings? And would you support the creation of a fair rent commission generally? Okay, I'm gonna stop polling. It's like everyone's supported the overall goal of protecting against displacement. Most people were not aware of the inspection requirement. And then we have 2 yeses for the fair rent commission and 3 not sures. Right. And then lastly, there are some strategies around, if the town is going to go through this process of creating a housing plan, how can we make sure that it gets adopted, that these strategies are implemented over the coming 5 years? So some of the things that we've talked about is potentially creating a housing plan implementation committee to sort of spearhead the work on these strategies. Again, some of it is around increasing awareness of residents in town about the resources that exist. That takes some time and some resources. And then the idea of holding an annual meeting. Each of these strategies, if they are put into the final draft of the plan, will have a lead entity. For example, if it was a zoning recommendation, obviously the Planning and Zoning Commission would be tasked with considering and implementing that. And there will be other town boards and commissions or staff tasked with each strategy. So the idea would be to hold a meeting at least once a year to sort of review the strategies in the housing plan with the boards, commissions, or staff that are tasked with heading those up to just check in, hear about any progress that's been made, or talk about what kind of the next steps are with implementation. This could potentially be made either an appendix to or just referenced in the current town plan of conservation and development. Again, just to make sure that your town plans are referencing each other, working to build the capacity of the town's existing housing organizations, such as the Housing Authority and the Winchester Housing Development Corp, as we talked about, is important for being able to implement this plan. And then setting whether potentially the town might want to create a housing fund that could help with some seed funding to do some of the things that are being suggested. So one town I know, the town of Goshen utilizes some of its conveyance fees to create a town fund that can be used for housing. And that could be something the town could consider, or it could consider, funding it a different way. But this is, the conveyance fees are already collected by the town. A portion of that does go into the general fund, and what we're suggesting here is maybe a study of what the impact would be if that was diverted to a housing fund. So those are the implementation strategies we've talked about. And we're just gonna do our last polling questions here. Again, we know there's not a ton of you on the call today. We're just wondering if anyone's interested in volunteering. We know lots of people are already volunteering on a bunch of other things, but we're just curious if anyone here is interested in volunteering opportunities. And then the last question is about whether you would support the idea of a town housing fund. All right, I only have 3. I don't know if everyone's tired of polling, but I promise that these are the last questions. All right, so I'm gonna end the polling. Share the results. All right. So just briefly want to again review with you where we are in this whole process. Again, we did this sort of housing needs assessment, including the resident input survey, collecting data around your existing housing stock and your housing needs. We did that kind of in November through February, again, with monthly meetings of the Housing Plan Steering Committee. We had an informational meeting in March, again, where we kind of reviewed the housing needs assessment and the survey results. And then the committee worked on these goals and strategies that you heard about today. And we had today's forum to provide the opportunity for residents to hear about what the goals and strategies were and give us some feedback, ask questions. And then we will proceed to draft the housing plan that will include all the sections that I talked about in an earlier slide. I don't think I'm going to have it ready for everybody in June, but in July, there will be a draft available for public review and comment, and then the plan will go through a formal adoption process. And we hope all of that will be completed by this fall. So with that, that's really kind of what we wanted to present. If there are any questions, we're happy to hear them. If there are any other ideas, things you wish we talked about, I'm going to stop sharing. And again, feel free to raise your hand or shout anything out if you have other questions, ideas, feedback.
Hi.
Hi.
I'm Dewey Yeager. I'm with the Winchester EDC, and I just want to say thank you, and I applaud this effort. And I guess my question would be back to first-time home buyers, and I'm kind of wondering what demand that you anticipate going forward, whether from manufacturers' needs or other businesses in the area, or what's coming to town. That's the kind of question, you know, the demographics of it all is kind of what I'm wondering, and how that's all built into it.
Well, one of the things we did to try to assess that, we did a worker housing needs survey. I think we didn't get quite as many responses to that as we had hoped. But Katie, do you want to mention the businesses that you kind of sent that out to?
Oh,
Do you remember all the businesses you sent it to?
yeah, the majority of the industrial park businesses, the college. I believe we sent it to town hall. Josh could correct me if I'm wrong about that. And I'm not sure. I think that was about it. I could be missing a few.
Yeah, so we didn't get a ton of responses, but the ones we did get, there was a lot of interest in home ownership. And so I think, you know, I think there's going to continue to be demand for, again, especially because of, you know, in terms of new houses, the cost of construction of new single family homes. You know, I think if there is a way that we can facilitate creating some more of those options that are affordable to the, you know, folks who work in town and folks who are earning, you know, below 80% of the area median income, I think there's no question there's demand for that.
Nick, did you want to comment on that at all?
Well, we did the college survey. I remember the college surveys was very positive. Being a younger person too, I mean, there's definitely like our country in Winstead's, you know, not mute to that, we're the missing middle, right? So we're not, the last 10 years, we've built less and less housing, probably due to the recession as an impact, and because we've built such less housing, the costs have gone up and the demand's gone up as well. So I think building, the more we can encourage people building housing, the more we can hopefully bring some costs down too, if that makes sense.
I think too, another thing that I'm seeing with the rent increases is that truly people could, what they're going to end up paying in rent, you know, could be a mortgage. These rents have gotten so high that they'd be better off if they, you know, could purchase their own home than to be continuing to rent at $1,500 or $1,800 a month.
Thanks for your question. And again, when I get the kind of everything put together in one document, we'd love for you to review it and let us know if you have kind of additional questions around the demographic trends that we're seeing and the demand.
Sure.
Thanks for coming. Anybody else have questions or comments or feedback for the committee?
Just some data I'd like to just throw out there a little bit.
Yeah.
When we talk about the housing stock and we talk about everything, just I did a quick count through the 2018 reval, and I know that there's more value onto things right now. So all these numbers would probably be up about, I don't know, 20,000, 30,000. But in 2018, there were 1,686 units roughly below $100,000. There were 1,300 units below 100,000 to 150,000 for sale or owned or valued, I should say, 2018. And there were 303 units between 150 and 175 units $175,000. So roughly you're looking at 29, about 3,000 units that were 175 or below that were for sale in 2018. And then up above that, there were 166 between 175 and 200, 383 units, 200 to 300, and roughly, I'd say probably 250 units, 300 and over of residential housing. So just something else that when we go forward to think about these things, that this data as well, in terms of what the town currently already has in terms of sales prices.
Thanks, Candy. All right, well, it is almost 1. If anybody here has other feedback or questions as we go along, obviously feel free to reach out to any of the members of the steering committee, including Josh or Katie or Candy, Nick, Pam, anybody. But again, we'll have another forum when we do have the draft plan ready, and we do really appreciate you being here today. Katie, were we going to try to regroup with the steering committee members quickly after this, or?
Yes, just briefly.
Okay. So anyone who's not on the steering committee, I mean, you can stay on if you want, hear what we have to say. But I think we're done with the feedback portion. So I don't know, we'll officially conclude that at 12:56.
Thanks all.
Thank you. All right.
So I think it's just the issue of the public, the in-person public forum.
Are we gonna record the sidebar conversation, or are we gonna stop the recording?
Oh, sorry.
No, I just want to be, so everybody.
Yeah, no, it'll probably be cleaner for us to just stop.